Have you ever wondered how, if all humans came from Noah's family after the flood, how the Chinese ended up in China, how the Aboriginal people arrived in Australia, or how the Native Americans reached the Americas? And not just people, what about the animals? How did the kangaroos end up in Australia? How did the llamas get to South America? How did all these creatures travel from Mount Ararat to every corner of the globe, especially when advanced ships didn't even exist yet? These questions are one of the main reasons some Christians believe the flood in Genesis was only local and not global. But I believe the Bible actually gives us clues, powerful clues, about how all of this could have happened in a global flood scenario.
Why theology?
Before that, let's go back to see why some people believe in the local flood. The strongest arguments they have is the Hebrew phrase kol eretz, meaning the whole earth. This is the phrase used in Genesis when it talks about the flood. They argue that kol eretz does not always literally mean the whole earth, and they're right. Kol eretz does not always mean the entire planet in a literal global sense. Sometimes it's hyperbole. For example, during the famine in Joseph's day, it says all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain. Obviously, not every tribe on every continent marched down to Egypt to buy grain. This is clearly an exaggeration. But here's the key. The only reason we know those uses are hyperbole is because the surrounding context makes it obvious. In the case of Joseph, the Bible already tells us about other nations. It tells us that the people were already spread out all over the world. So it makes sense that all the world just means all the surrounding nations. We're not picturing the Chinese people going to Egypt, for example. And the point of that story is to show how God used Joseph to help his family, not about everyone around the world buying grain. Another example that the local flooders would bring up as a hyperbole is in Genesis chapter 8, verse 9. It says, "But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth." And they would say that the whole earth there is obviously hyperbole because a few verses before that, in Genesis 8, verse 5, it says, "And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day, the tops of the mountain were seen." So they would say, see, this proves that the whole earth was hyperbolic because it cannot be the whole earth when the tops of the mountains were seen. And I would agree because the Bible gave the context for that verse. That's why it's so obvious. But in the flood story, the context is different. Let's read it together. "The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the water. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. That's 22 and a half feet. And all flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures and that swarms on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died." In reading that, it's obvious that the emphasis over and over again is how the waters rose high above the mountains, that it's 22 and a half feet above it, and that all and every living creatures on dry land died. And there was no exceptions that could indicate that maybe this is not the whole earth like it did in Genesis 8. The context does not point to hyperbole, but to totality. Let's remember something crucial. The world before the flood was radically different from our world today. This isn't speculation. The Bible itself describes a world with fallen angels interacting openly with humans, giants or Nephilims ruling the land, human lifespan approaching to 1,000 years, a global corruption so bad that God had to intervene. And one very important point, I would argue, before the flood, the land was not divided yet. That there were no islands or continents, and that the continents we know now were all together as one big land before the flood. This is not a new concept. Even in science, there's a theory called Pangaea, the belief that all the continents were once a single landmass that eventually divided and drifted apart. The only difference is the timing. They would put the division of the land millions of years ago, and biblical Christians would say that the division happened during the flood, around 4,500 years ago. But I would argue that it actually happened 3 generations after the flood. You might wonder, where in the Bible does it talk about the division of the earth? It's not really something that we teach or emphasize in our Sunday schools like we do for other stories, because not a lot of Christians know about this. This event is hidden in the book. You might have read it before, but didn't really know what it means, or you probably just skipped over it. So where does it actually talk about this event? Let's turn to Genesis 10. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were the sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah, and the sons of Javat, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodamim. Usually at this point, our eyes glaze over because it's tiring to read all these weird names that aren't really relevant to the story, and we probably just skip over this part to the next chapter so we can get to the action. At least I do. I don't like reading genealogies because it's boring. But when we do that, sometimes we miss important clues. So let's go back and see. Let's go to verse 21. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth, the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, and Ashur, and Aparshad, and Lud, and Aram, and the children of Aram, Uz, and Hul, and Geter, and Mash, and Aparshad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktam, and Joktam begat Almodad, and Shelephat. Wait. Hold on, did you catch that? Let's go back. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. What? The earth was divided? Did you catch that? What does that mean? So the Hebrew words Eretz Peleg just means what it says. The earth, Eretz, or the land, was divided or split, Peleg. So the division of the earth happened in the days of Peleg. Now some Christians argue that this verse was only talking about the Tower of Babel, because in that story it talks about the division of the people into nations. But if you read the story, you will see that it's not talking about the earth being divided, but the confusion of the language of the people and the scattering of those people all around the world. The key word here is scatter, which is a word used for the dispersion of people, not land. And Peleg literally means to split or to divide, and applying it to land. Also, the word Peleg only occurs 7 times in the Bible, and they all refer to this event, while the word scatter is used many times all over the Bible, talking about the people being dispersed or spread out. So it would seem to me that the Peleg event is different from the scattering of Babel. Another thing to note is that the city of Babel was established by Nimrod, who was born 2 generations before Peleg. So it's very likely that the division of the earth happened after the Tower of Babel. Another objection might be, well, if the continent split apart, why was it not emphasized? Well, because the Bible only records events that matter to the central storyline of God's relationship with humanity and our response to Him. Our sin and God's judgment and redemption. It doesn't mention any earthquakes that happened in China or South America, a major catastrophe that happened in history. It happens all throughout history. The Bible doesn't talk about it. The Bible only highlights catastrophes that directly fit into the message that he's talking about, which is his judgment. The fall, the flood, Tower of Babel, Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are all stories that the Bible emphasizes because it talks about his judgments towards sin. It's not a book that details all the natural catastrophes in history. So if Peleg's division happened after the Tower of Babel, it suddenly explains a lot. So at Babel, God confused the languages, creating distinct people groups. Then they were scattered all around the world. And after that, the earth was divided, physically splitting apart. So these newly formed people groups were scattered, and then they were carried along as the land split apart together. So if you think about it, the mysteries that I talked about in the beginning, start to make sense. It starts to have answers. I'll let Gavin Ortland explain those mysteries. Gavin is actually one of my favorite Christian YouTubers online, but he doesn't believe in the global flood. So in this video, he actually explains one of his biggest objections why he doesn't believe in the global flood.
Number one is the transportation of animals to the ark and then back afterwards from all around the globe. Genesis 6:20 says that two of every sort of animal shall come into you, but it says nothing about a kind of miraculous transportation from their original location nor back to it when the flood is over. It just basically says that the flood subsides and they got off the ark. Now, this is going to be miraculous any way you slice it, but the miracles are in a different register when you think about a global flood. So just picture, Arctic wolves in northern Canada, kangaroos and wallabies and marsupials in Australia, the various species of indigenous animals to Madagascar, a little island off the coast of Southeast Africa, poison dart frogs in the rainforests of Brazil, giant salamanders in the freshwater pools of Japan, llamas in the Andes Mountains of Peru and Bolivia, penguins in the South Pole, giant tortoises in the Galapagos Islands. I tried to think of some of my favorite animals. I love animals. We lived in St. Louis for 2 years. They have a great free zoo. We'd go to the zoo all the time. I find animals fascinating. And so I like to get specific with this, not trying to poke fun at this, but trying to put it out there as a legitimate curiosity to ask, how did this happen? How did they all get to the ark? How did they all return to their respective territories? How did they cross oceans to get there in some cases? How did they survive being so out of their ordinary environment?
So after watching that, you can see how Peleg's division actually answers all of Gavin's objections. So his objections was, how did the animals get to the ark if they're all spread out all over the continent? Then how did they spread out all over the continent after the flood, right? And then same thing for humans. How did the humans travel to all those places after the flood? Because in his mind, he's imagining the world after the flood the same as it is right now, where all continents are separated and there's vast oceans in between them. So in Peleg's view, this solves it because the land is just all together as one big landmass. It's not separated by seas and oceans. So the animals after the flood could just walk there to everywhere, all over the landmass, right? And same for people. After God scatters the people after Tower of Babel, he scatters them, separating them to different nations. Then they just travel, they just migrate, they just walk all over the land. And as God separated and divided the land in Peleg's days, those people and those animals got carried with the land as they drift apart. So it explains it, and it's a lot easier to imagine how this could have happened. Of course, there's still some deal of miracles. Whether your view is local or global flood, it doesn't matter. There's a miracle. The flood itself is a big miracle, but it's not the big level degree of miracle that Gavin is talking about, right? But even then, even if he is right that it was local flood, that the world was as it is right now after the flood, God is powerful. He could just transport the people and the animals to wherever he wants them to be, just like he did for Philip the evangelist, right? God could do those things. When Philip was talking to the eunuch, God transported him to a completely different place after. God could do those things. But with the Peleg view, it's a lot easier to imagine. It doesn't require us to believe big miracles like that, like what Gavin is asking for. It answers his questions. And even today, there's a guy named Carl Bushby. He actually managed to walk the whole earth. That's crazy. I mean, it took him a while. It took him about 28 years to do that. And he's actually not done yet. He's going to be done, projected to be this year. But he was able to do that today, to just walk the whole earth. It took him longer because he had to worry about different national borders. And then also he was delayed in 2020 because of COVID, so he wasn't able to walk. But he was able to do that in a world that's separated by continents and nations, and seas and oceans. That's pretty cool that he was able to do that. But imagine back then where people did not have to worry about it because there's just one big landmass. It's a lot easier to imagine that, right? So I thought it was interesting. I just wanted to make this video. And also it explains, God, when God said to the people in Genesis, his first mandate was like, go into all the world. If the land was just one big landmass, it was a lot easier to imagine how the people could have done that, right? So yeah, that's my take. What do you guys think? Does this answer some of the mysteries that you've been thinking about? Does it fill some gaps? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments below. I hope this video has blessed you, and I hope you watch my other videos after this. So, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye. God bless.